It's no secret I am a huge fan of therapy. It's one of the most important ways I've supported my own growth over the years, which is why I do not recommend platforms lightly. This month, Courage Class has partnered with Anise Health, an AAPI-focused online therapy platform I have personally used. And from the very first session, I felt very understood. My therapist immediately recognized my struggle with perfectionism and understood it through a cultural lens without judgment or without me having to over-explain. I laughed and I cried and I left feeling lighter. That's what culturally attuned care should feel like. If therapy is something you're considering, Anise is offering a free intake session this month using my code COURAGE2026, all one word. So go to Anise Health, that's www.anisehealth.co, complete the intake form, less than 5 minutes, and get matched with a therapist who understands your lived experience. Welcome to Courage Class. I'm Dr. Lindsay Kwok-Hugh, and each week I'm in conversation with our community's changemakers and trailblazers. Together, we explore the unspoken parts of our Asian and Western experiences, finding strength, growth, and healing that reflect who we truly are, not who we've been told to be. I'm so glad you're here. Class is now in session. Hey, Courage Class. So if you've been listening for a while, you already know that I am going to preach and preach and preach that your mental health is of paramount importance. And it's equally important that you find a therapist who truly understands your lived experience. You might also know that in a previous work life, I would shout from the rooftops that culture is like the air we breathe. It's so important when it comes to learning. It quietly shapes how we think, act, and make decisions. And when learning and care is built on that cultural context, that is where optimal learning and healing can actually occur. And this is the heart of Anise Health. I want to introduce today's guest, Israa Nasir. She is the Director of Clinical Strategy at Anise Health, an AAPI-focused mental health platform. And she brings deep clinical training as a licensed therapist, along with nearly 8 years working in digital health, to ensure that Anise delivers care with real clinical integrity, that it's evidence-based and thoughtfully designed. You guys, everything that you encounter on this platform is built with the AAPI community in mind. It's really incredible. And I'm so grateful to share this conversation with all of you today. Let's take a listen. For that person who is listening to this conversation, who feels very overwhelmed or maybe disconnected or unsure where to start with regard to their mental health, if they take to heart everything that you'll share today and they begin to implement it, what kind of change do you think they'll experience in their lives?
One of the most important things that I think starts to shift is like micro decision making. And I think that's the piece that is the first time we actually see healing in action. Is something happened that you used to react differently before, and now you're actually choosing a different response. And it's in these like small things that people start to notice, like this is what happens.
Yeah.
So even like a really, really small thing, like I'm suddenly feeling like triggered, I'm going to pull up my phone and scroll. Like even shifting away from that into I'm feeling triggered, I'm going to drink water instead. Like it's so small. But I think that's the incremental building block of emotional growth and change. And that's what happens when we kind of come to a place of integrating our awareness and our habits into our daily lives.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I appreciate that you just shared that, because that feels so doable. When I think about therapy and when I think about transformation, I think of these huge changes that I feel this pressure to make. But a micro decision or a micro action, a micro change, that feels like something I can walk away from the conversation implementing today. So I really appreciate you bringing that to the fore, because I think that that's incredibly important for our listeners to really understand. Again, this is all about micro actions that you can certainly take. I want to back up and I want to talk specifically about your role at Anise Health. You are the Director of Clinical Strategy and Operations, amongst many other incredible hats that you wear. Would you be
Mhm.
willing to share what is your specific role and responsibility at Anise?
Yeah, so clinical strategy kind of sits at the intersection of business metrics and operations, day-to-day operations, and then kind of on top of that is the layer of clinical care.
Okay.
So it's like an interesting bridge of a role. By training, I'm a therapist. And so I bring a lot of clinical knowledge, but I've been in like the digital health tech space for about like almost like 7.5, 8 years.
Mm.
So I also have a lot of knowledge around like early stage startups and, you know, all of that. And of course, I'm also learning everything every day, as we all are. But my role really is making sure that we provide like the best level of clinical care that has a lot of clinical integrity. So it's like evidence-based, the processes make sense, there's a lot of protection and all of that for the client and the provider,
Okay.
while we meet our business metrics, while we meet operational efficiency.
Yes.
So I think it's really important in digital health space, especially behavioral health, to have a clinician who is part of the decision making when you think about what type of alerts to build in your platform, which pieces of the work should be automated, what should be the trigger points for certain things to shift from intense to moderate or moderate to severe, right? And so it's like it's really important to have somebody who has worked in mental health that they can inform this process,
Sure.
but also have the understanding of what's important for a business to work.
Absolutely.
And I will say, that my role is impossible to be solo. It is like truly like an intersectional, interdisciplinary role because I am almost operating in lieu of a clinical director, right? So a clinical director just is like working with the therapist only. So I do that. Like I support our therapists, issues get escalated, but when you build something that touches so many different parts of the system, we all have to be on the same page. Like no one element is more important than the other. So that the product team is just as important as the clinical process, which is as just as important as business and marketing. And I think that's what's working is like everyone is kind of like talking to each other all the time.
Yes, yes. And you're like the glue going. It
I'm just
feels
a
like,
bridge.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now I know that culturally attuned care is a hallmark of Anise Health. And I'm wondering if you would be willing for our listeners to really share what exactly does that mean? And why does Anise Health believe that that's a critical part of the conversation when it comes to care?
Yeah, so what that means is that your cultural context, your cultural dynamic, and background is baked into the treatment plan. So when a therapy treatment plan is, when you were just talking about general, um, asking about culture happens downstream. Asking about cultural elements and dynamics happens much later in the therapeutic journey because we're just getting like some standard information about family and things like that, right? But we all know that our culture dominates, for anyone, dominates like your blueprint of so many beliefs that you have. So many family dynamics are very heavily influenced by cultural upbringing. So what we're doing is we're actually integrating it into the care plan, into the treatment plan, into the first conversation, instead of it being like a sideline or an afterthought that we come to when we get there.
Yes.
And that right off the bat gives somebody a much stronger understanding of what's going on with this person, right? And we don't operate from the assumption that just because the therapist is Asian and the client is Asian, that they automatically are going to have this like understanding, right? So while yes, the clinical care model is rooted in being the cultural context is forward,
Yes.
right? We also do offer trainings to our providers, our Asian providers. We're still giving them trainings that are evidence-based. They are built in partnership with universities like Berkeley, where we are doing research on how to adapt Western modalities into, a cultural framework
Wow.
or into a collective community framework.
Yes.
And we offer those trainings like how do you actually set boundaries in the Asian context How do you actually teach people executive presence or finding their voice in a cultural context?
Mm,
We're actually teaching our clinicians that, who of course are coming in with all of this knowledge themselves as well,
yes.
but we want to standardize the client experience, and that's, I think, the biggest difference.
I see. I see. No, that's wonderful. And actually, you just mentioned boundaries. As someone who is in the moment trying to learn to set boundaries, sometimes I'll hear from like social media, someone will say, well, you should just cut that person off, or you should cut your
Mm-hmm.
parents off, for example. And I know that there are cases
Mm-hmm.
when that might be necessary. And as someone who was raised in an Asian context, I'm supposed to, revere my elders. That in it by itself it just feels so undoable. What are some of the most common barriers that keep AAPI individuals from pursuing therapy or mental health support?
The latest statistics show that the Asian American group is the largest underutilizer of behavioral health services.
Yeah.
However, we have a very high representation in suicide rates that show up at the emergency rooms. So there is a huge disconnect,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
and the fact that we have the leading suicide rate for youth in America, within, if you break down by ethnic groups, right? And so what that tells me is that we are experiencing issues that are mental health related, even though our community doesn't like talking about it.
Yes.
B, we are delaying care until it is at crisis point and we're getting to the ER, right? We're not using the community outpatient services. We are not using wraparound supports that are present
Yes.
and accessible. And so, I mean, the barriers are, to name a few that we hear about a lot, which is like the cultural framework around shame and honor. So collectivist culture in general, not just Asian, but if we even look at like North African or Arab, Middle Eastern, Persian, like a lot of collectivist cultures are very honor-based cultures.
Mm.
And when there is a definition of what honor means, and that definition kind of is in contrast to what mental illness can look like, and like the mythology around the spiritual elements of mental illness, like it makes it a very dishonorable act.
I see.
And so it is a threat to the cultural thread, right? You are bringing dishonor to the family. And so immediately people are very, very ashamed to even talk about it. Like that's the really deep foundational framework of it,
Yeah.
because we are an honor-based culture. And so that's one thing, the stigma, right? The second is like being in the West as diaspora communities, we have different varieties of like language proficiency, right? So if you break it by generation, the older generation doesn't often speak English like native speaking English, which is the second generation or 1.5.
Mm.
And so there is like an inherent like disconnect between language. And I'll speak from like a Pakistani perspective. There is no like true word for depression in Urdu outside of the clinical term for it. So in layman's term, there is actually no word to talk about it without saying like just like, oh, I'm feeling sad.
Yes.
Right. And so there's the language doesn't capture the experience. So you can't even fully explain yourself. So that's one reason that people also underutilize it. And then there is a systemic mistrust to the broader Western framework because we have a history of being oppressed here, right? Like you see all of this like societal oppression for the Chinese community, the Japanese after the world wars, post 9/11 Muslims, right? The Indian American experience is so varied. Like you've got the model minority, and there's so much power in the Indian group right now. But there is also a huge like oppression around visas, and so there is a mistrust of the system that compounds the stigma and prevents people from seeking care. So I mean, it's a very complicated, nuanced.
Yeah.
A lot of times we talk about it and we say the stat, oh, you know what, Asians are the biggest underutilizers of healthcare. And it makes it seem like it's an Asian problem, but it's not just an Asian problem. Yes, we have the stigma. Yes, we have the honor base. Yes, we have the collectivist unit.
Yes.
And there's a systemic barrier to it,
Absolutely.
right? A lot of marginalized communities live in low income areas where there's not access to good healthcare services. Your insurance is connected to your job, and many people are underemployed within the Asian diaspora because of all of these systemic oppressions and poverty. I mean, it's like so much more complicated than just saying Asian people don't want mental health
Yeah,
care.
absolutely. In fact, the word that I
Yeah.
wrote down as you were speaking, there are so many structural barriers that prevent us from getting the care that it almost feels like using the word that we are entitled to, just in the
Or
same
deserving of.
or deserving of,
Deserving of, yeah.
absolutely. But it's just as important as your physical health. And
Hmm.
yes, the cultural context, it runs very deep in our community when you talk about language and the stigma that's surrounding it. And there are literal systemic structural barriers that prevent us from or significantly reduce our ability to access the
Yeah.
care that we are deserving of. So thank you for sharing that. Now, let's say that we are ready to get the mental health care that we are certainly deserving of. Could you walk us through how Anise's matching process works? So, how does cultural attunement really show up in that matching process?
Our matching process, the first step is very simple in that you go on the website and it's an intake form that you answer a couple of questions. Some are general mental health, like because mental health is a medical concern, right? So like we ask some important questions around suicide safety, history, those type of things, four simple questions. We ask a little about like what are you currently struggling with, broadly speaking. Then we ask about generational status, like what's your generational status, like because that does matter, and it actually has shown in trends of how people utilize mental health care. Right, we are seeing a difference between the generations. Even when we analyze our data set, which is one company, finite, small data set, and you still see the trends. So we ask about generational status. We ask about ethnic, like your ethnic background, how you self-identify,
Okay.
and if you have a preference in your provider, right? Like, do you want to, as a Southeast Asian person, do you want a Southeast Asian therapist, or is all Asian okay, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we do try to capture that. Now, the research shows that ethnic matching is not the most important thing,
Okay.
but people tend to care a lot about it, and that's why we have that there. You have the option of just selecting I don't care, and that's fine too.
I see.
Um, and then, when you kind of share a little about what's bringing you here, you can share more about like what's going on. And we are now trying to utilize some, intelligent analysis to pick themes on what would be the best cultural fit based on what you're actually talking about.
I see.
And that kind of gets baked into the person you receive. So at the end of the intake form, and the intake form is like, I think it's like 6 questions,
Okay.
including the safety screener is 3 questions, and then you've got like four more. So
Okay.
7 questions, I think. You receive your top 3 matches from our pool right away. We highlight why this person was selected for you by identifying the matching pieces.
Okay.
And then you can explore the bio of the provider and you can book your intake right then and there.
I see.
So the whole thing end to end should be taking five to 6 minutes, depending on how deeply you go into the writing of what's going on.
Okay.
And then, of course, we have the insurance cost estimator, so you can put in your insurance and understand how much you might be responsible for per session. But the 2 questions around generational status and presenting problem,
Mm-hmm.
like the cultural components of it and the provider's ethnic preference. Those 3 things are integrated into like how we give you the match.
I see. I see. That's incredibly helpful, and I really appreciate you walking us through that process. You had mentioned the write up. I'm curious to know. So when folks are community members are describing sort of what they're maybe struggling with, are they choosing from a checklist and maybe adding a little bit more, or is it literally a write up where they're describing how they're feeling or what they're experiencing? Could you share a little bit more about that specific process?
Yeah, so it's both. There
Okay.
is like a selection of like radio buttons essentially, and you can
Okay.
pick your top 3.
Okay.
And then you have the ability to expand. Usually people are writing maybe like 4 or 5 sentences.
I
People
see.
have a little bit of an understanding of what they're wanting support in right now in this present moment.
Mm.
And like it's usually centered around some similar common themes.
Okay, I see. I see.
Mhm.
And I'm just curious to know, it took me, when I went through the process, it only took me a couple of minutes. Is that a fair estimation? A couple of minutes that it will take for folks to go through this process? I really want to encourage people to go through the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like probably like 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Wonderful.
Yeah.
That's perfect. I can totally do that, like on a lunch break or right before I go pick up the kids. So I really want to
Hmm.
encourage folks to certainly engage that process. It's a very fast, and it's really incredible the way that, I mean, I felt like I was matched with like the perfect therapist, literally. And so it was a very easy and seamless process when I went through it.
Yeah, and you can do it on your phone too, like in the web browser.
Oh,
So while
perfect.
we don't have an app, we do have a very like web optimized like experience. So if you just pull up Chrome or Safari on your phone, you to put in like the
Okay.
web address, which is anisehealth.co, you can easily just do it on your phone too. So if you're like waiting for someone or waiting in line for a coffee, like you can actually just do it at that
Oh,
time.
perfect, perfect. I thank you for bringing that up too. I had done it on my laptop, but even the option of doing it very quickly on my phone is excellent.
Mhm.
Um, Isra, you had mentioned earlier that part of your role is to work with clinicians as well. Could you describe the training program, the preparation process, and even the continued development that Anise Health provides to any clinician who is interested in working through the platform?
Yeah, so the training, so once there's like the general onboarding training, which is like our internal process and technology and all that stuff. And then there is a cultural training. So we have this thing called the Cultural Impact Index, which is three assessments that
Okay.
are evidence-based. And we selected them because these are studied to be showing up for Asian clients most. So
Okay.
perfectionism is something the Asian American group struggles with, based on research. So we have the Frost perfectionism scale. Then we've got the acculturation stress scale, which indicates like kind of where you're at in like your journey of like acculturating to the broader, Western group. And then we've got the multi-ethnic identity measure, which is like a measure of how you identify as someone who is like either like bicultural, so like Asian but grew up in the States, or if you're like Asian came as an immigrant, or your parents were born here. So it kind of like assesses like your assimilation and an internal understanding of identity, because that's what shows up in so many other things. So if someone is struggling with some family dynamics, knowing where you fall on these scales can help empower you to understand yourself more. So we train our clinicians on
Okay.
those. These are not very commonly used tools, right? Like usually people use the PHQ and GAD, which is depression and anxiety. But
Mm,
these are very specific to working with people who are navigating bicultural tension, navigating intergenerational trauma, navigating like, intergenerational families and things like that. And so that's why we selected these three, and our clients receive these assessments once every 12 weeks as progress because they're going through this journey. So we train our clinicians on that.
I
And
see.
then we have something called an intervention map where, based on the score that your client is receiving on these tools, we offer them like tailored interventions that they can recommend to their clients.
I see.
So, how can you integrate this into your treatment plan? How
Yes.
can you utilize this as a way to generate more like growth in a certain area? Or how do you actually connect this to a presenting problem that you're getting?
Yes.
So, we've got that. And then, currently working with Berkeley on creating more tools like this. It's like a very cool study, and it's even more targeted to working with the Asian diaspora, especially around racism recovery and
Mm,
navigating generational trauma specifically, and finding more targeted assessment tools. Because if you think about it, most of the tools that we have right now that we use to measure care with are accurate and studied and evidence-based, but the sample size is often very heteronormative, middle class, nuclear family, white, right? So, like, most of the tools are built on that system. And again, these are valid tools. And I always used them when I was practicing. We just want to take it a next step, a step
yes.
further.
A step into the AAPI community, it feels like it feels so tailored for
Yeah. 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 And my hope is that, we all like in our niche populations like do this so that we provide good care to people,
Absolutely.
and we are doing it right now with the AAPI community, but I would love to see more of this for other groups too, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. It feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like that's where the standardization comes into play. When you're asking a clinician to refer to this instrument and to look at the data generated from the instrument, to refer to
It's a
assessment
clinical
tools,
assessment tool. Yeah.
and to actually use the information maybe embedded into this assessment tool to embed into their treatment plan. And knowing that the tool was designed specifically with our community in mind. I've never heard of something so robust and wonderfully tailored for the community. I mean, I knew that this was exactly the outcome that we were going to achieve when we're talking about Anise Health, but it's even more incredible to actually hear you describe the way clinicians are providing care.
Hmm.
So I thank you so much for sharing that, really. I'm wondering, one of the wonderful learnings that I had upon using the platform, I always thought it was therapy only. And what I learned is that there's a much more holistic component built into the platform. And I'm wondering, would you be willing to talk about the holistic programs or services that our community can leverage via Anissa's platform?
Yeah, so the first one is behavioral health coaching. We do offer a layer of coaching for clients who want it, or who essentially are working with a therapist and they are not actively symptomatic on anything. They don't have a trauma history, and they would be just really interested in having another accountability partner for
Mm,
behavior change. They're trying to change some habits.
okay.
So we do offer behavioral health coaching, and our coaches do work very closely with the therapists,
Okay.
and so that everyone's working on the same goal. No, you're not just doing like four different things. So that's one thing we offer, which is very helpful. Like the research also shows that the Asian group is more action oriented. If you kind of think about patterns of family behaviors, we are less vocal about our feelings. We are more, we come to therapy complaining about physical symptoms, especially like elder Asians, instead of talking about emotional symptoms. We're very action oriented, solution
Mm.
oriented. Skip over the emotional piece and go right
Sure.
into movement,
Yes.
right? And this is like studied. It's like not just a generic stereotype, but we've all seen it in our families.
Absolutely.
And I joke about it with my mom all the time. Um, but so to leverage that piece, we do offer this behavioral health coaching, and the people who engage with it do really well.
I see.
Of course, like, coaching is something that most people are not familiar with. So we offer a lot of education around it as well. If you
Okay.
go on the website, you can kind of learn how coaches can help you and how it can be integrated into your care. And then we also offer peer support groups. So we, have had like Asian mental health groups, um, perfectionism groups, like things like that, that are just open to public and in peer. Peer has a lot of strength. It helps us destigmatize mental illness and mental health in our communities,
Mm,
because the more we see other people talk about it, the more empowered we become to take it into our lives, the conversation. So I'm a huge fan of
okay.
peer support groups.
Are those in
Um,
person only, or are they also online, the peer support groups? I'm just curious to know.
Yeah, so far they've been virtual only. So they
Oh,
are open to
okay.
everyone,
Oh,
anywhere. And
okay.
they are led by peers. So they're not like group therapy.
Yes,
It's like you have, a niece coach or therapist present. And then you've also, but it's like a peer-led group discussion.
I see.
We've had some that are just one only, and then we've had some that are series, that you can come for a 4-week series and it's the same group, and you might be talking about grief, or you might be talking about substance use in the family, like things like that.
I see.
Um,
Is
that
it,
and then
are
we
they
have a
small? Are they small? I'm sorry. Are they small
oh, no,
groups?
no,
I'm just, are they small?
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it ranges. I'm not like there's no cap, but I
Oh,
do
okay.
think like it's like around like 8 to 10 people
I see. I
for the
see.
most part. Yeah.
Wonderful.
I think anything over 15 becomes difficult to kind of like have a robust conversation in.
Sure.
So like
Yeah.
I would probably cap it at that. But we haven't had very large groups, so
I
it's been
see.
good. Um, Yeah, and then we've got digital resources that our clients can access,
Yes.
lots of worksheets that align with like what work you're doing with your therapist, lots of, journal prompts, working on podcasts right now. So just trying to get people wherever they're at, how they consume information is
Sure.
really important. And finally, one piece I'll say is, we in mental health work on trying to destigmatize mental illness and mental health in the Asian community in this one-on-one, right, therapeutic environment.
Mhm.
Equally important is to shift the conversation at like a group level, which is why we also try to show up and be very present and visible in corporate spaces and nonprofit spaces. We do have an element of the work that we do where we do a lot of corporate engagements where we go and we talk to employee resource groups,
Wow.
particularly AAPI resource groups,
Yeah.
or if there is like a DEI effort happening in an organization, we'll go and we have presence and we give webinars and we do workshops, like especially in May for API month, um, because that is kind of shifting the conversation at like a societal level.
Yes.
It's important to shift it individually. It's important to shift it at like a mental health medical level, but it's equally important to shift it at a societal level so that it can also be shifted at a policy level,
Oh my
right?
gosh. Yes.
Partnering with nonprofit, partnering with
Yes.
corporates, being there, hosting community events. We just hosted Lucy Liu last weekend for her latest movie, Rosemead. We've sponsored conferences that are out in the nonprofit space for Korean American mental health, Asian American mental health. And so, like, I think that's also really important. We're not just like a healthcare service providing healthcare. We
Absolutely.
truly, genuinely believe in like shifting the conversation forward for Asian mental health at different layers of
Yes.
society.
No, that's incredible. You took the words right out of my mouth when you were describing the work that you do to engage the corporate organizations. I was thinking like it's the structural piece that we were talking about earlier. Like it's really pushing the envelope on the structure as well as providing one-on-one care. There's so much going on. There's so many opportunities, it feels like, for our community to really plug in. I'm curious to know the peer wellness groups, is this free for folks? Like can they log in and join? I'm just curious. Maybe you're not ready quite yet to do one-on-one care, and
Mhm.
it feels like a wonderful opportunity to certainly get to know the services.
Yeah, so we offer them at like a rolling basis.
Okay.
So we have a newsletter that goes out that informs you when that's coming up. And sometimes the one-offs have been free. Some of the series have been paid. And you don't actually have to join the platform to join the peer group.
I see.
Most people do end up becoming clients.
Sure.
Yeah. So if someone's listening and they're curious or they're interested, definitely like sign up for the newsletter,
Okay.
the email list, and you can then get the updates.
Yes, perfect. Thank you for sharing that. And we're going to definitely post the website and contact information will be available in the show notes for anyone who's listening who's like, I really want to take advantage of that. I'm wondering where are the program and services currently available? And if folks do not live in a state where therapy is made available via an Anise trained clinician, are there opportunities for people currently not in a state covered area? It sounds like the peer wellness group might be one opportunity, or with an approved insurance company.
Yeah, so we are in quite a few states, and one of
Okay.
our biggest goals is to be present in more states so that more people can access. So Washington State, California, New York, Massachusetts, Florida, we are very active in. And then we've got some therapists who are SIPACT members, which allows a certain designation of therapists to provide services out of state.
Okay.
So if you're curious
Mhm.
about that, you can always send us a message and we can help you figure it out. Like, for example, we recently connected someone to a provider who lives in, I think, North Carolina, but under SIPACT was able to provide services to the client who lives in Connecticut. So
Wow.
there are ways to kind of go through, and this is all above board. This is like a designation that the provider has to get.
Okay.
And so we do have quite a few providers who are like that. So
Okay.
while we don't provide care in North Carolina, that provider is able to provide care in other SIPAC states.
I
So
see.
that's something that you can kind of actually figure out by contacting us. But when you go on the website to fill out the intake form, if you like select the drop down from the state, if your state is not like covered, we do offer you an instruction that you can then follow
Okay.
to get more information,
I see.
especially around SIPAC. If
Okay.
your state is covered, it'll take you to the next step
Okay.
immediately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That's really helpful. Thanks for sharing that. What if folks don't
Mhm.
have an approved insurance company at the moment? How can they still receive Anis's support?
There's two ways. So we do offer self-pay, which is like out of, pay as you go services. And so that's the most common way. And we do have quite a few, probably almost 40% of our population is self-pay. So we're very
Oh,
accessible. We have very competitive rates compared
okay.
to other therapy platforms. Um, and we also offer out-of-network benefits. So if we don't accept your insurance, we will offer you a super bill that you can then submit, that so that you can actually get some reimbursements based on your insurance
Okay.
coverage. And the cost estimator, that when you do the intake form, when you put in your insurance, like it will give you that information as well.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, but I always say get that information. It's always up to date, but I always encourage people to also call their insurances, especially if they're doing out of network. We try our best to give you the most updated information, but just as conscious consumers of healthcare
Sure.
in America, I
Yes.
think it's always recommended to call your insurance company to
Yes.
figure it out. I don't intend for this to be a barrier, but we try our best to give you the right information
Absolutely.
that's most up to date. But the best of us sometimes get caught up in like insurance loopholes of like confusion. Like I recently had to go to the emergency room for like somewhat of an emergency, but not a life-threatening one. And while on my app it said that I was covered for like ER
Mhm.
services, because of whatever they coded, I ended up getting a very large bill, right? And so like it can be very
Yes.
like annoying.
Yes. Yes.
So this is a side thing. I
Yes.
think all Americans should be very proactively aware of their insurance because healthcare here is gate kept by insurance.
Absolutely.
I'm
Absolutely.
originally Canadian, so I have a lot of strong thoughts
You're like,
about
what is
this.
going on in the US? Oh my gosh. Yeah, as an American, I think that with respect to healthcare too, and I let out this sort of sigh when you were sharing your ER experience because we had a very similar experience. So I can imagine, it really
Yeah.
resonates because it's frustrating. It's really frustrating.
Yeah, yeah. But we
I,
do try to make it as easy as possible. And I
yes.
think very soon we're going to actually build in like a cost estimator that's just on the website. So you don't have to
Okay.
start the intake. You can just check out how much you'll have to pay.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks for
Yeah.
sharing that. I really appreciate you going through all of these logistical components of what
Yeah.
is a niche, how do I use it, what are some of the offerings. I would love at this point to transition into what I think is one of the most exciting components to the platform. And these are stories of healing and hope. And I would love if you could share a success story, Israa, that really captures, what happens when someone finally receives the culturally attuned support that they've been needing.
Um, in terms of what happens in the therapeutic environment or what happens in their life.
Um, if you have a story around what happens in their life, if you have a therapeutic, I'm sure you do, wonderful stories of what happens in a therapeutic context, whatever you're comfortable and
Got it.
able to share as well.
Yeah. So I think, some very tangible things that we've seen
Yeah.
is repair in family relationships. A lot of times, I mean, right now in the broader culture, there's this big discussion between the groups of cut your family off versus the
Yeah.
latest New York Times article that just came out that was like, just ignore the problematic family member. I don't know if you read it.
Yeah.
There was an op-ed
Yeah.
that came out
Yeah.
about like just letting go of
Yes.
toxic family members or whatever
Yes.
and just dealing with it.
Yeah.
But what actually happens, like a success story that this is like a composite success story because this has happened for a lot of people
Yeah.
with who are with Anise, is there's actually family repair. There is the ability to see, so one of the most common problems we receive in the little paragraph that people write is family trauma, family dysfunction, having issues with parents, having issues with grandparents, or having issues with your children.
Yes.
And consistently, what we see at the end of it, when we seek feedback, when people are like graduating out of care, is I was able to set aside differences and rebuild the relationship I had. I was able to forgive my parents for what they did and communicate the pain that it caused me.
Wow.
And now we have a better relationship. I was able to tell my parents that I don't want to get married or I don't want to have children, but we had it in such a constructive way and it didn't blow up our relationship.
Yeah.
You know, I'm able to actually spend time with my mother-in-law now. Like it's those are the things that I see quite a bit
Yeah.
is like, because the cultural context is so important when you're navigating family dynamics, right? And having a therapist who understands right off the bat some of the nuances that are difficult to explain to a non-Asian / Western therapist, or even some of the practices that are labeled dysfunctional immediately in the Western model, but are protective for a lot of Asian clients, right? Like speaking up is not always the best thing for an Asian client, even though a Western framework will say that's the thing you have to do. So I think it's like things like that. Another success story is helping like queer identified Asian clients really understand that coming out is a Western concept. It's not a concept that exists in the rest of the world. And they feel so much pressure to come out to their Asian parents, sometimes at the risk of their safety, their emotional safety, the relationship. And so like helping them navigate that and come out on the other side, very confident and comfortable in their decisions. These are all really powerful pivots in life. And they're so sensitive and they have to be kind of like treated with so much care instead of like callously trying to fit them into like what is seen as like appropriate or clinically adaptive and all of those things that, you know, we all get stuck in as clinicians sometimes. And so these are some themes of success stories that I see, especially around family and identity.
No, absolutely. And you're right. It's such a nuanced context to navigate a conversation with your parents. And I'm just, you know, as you're sharing, I was thinking about some of the more difficult conversations that I, as a 45-year-old woman, have recently had with my parents. And how much thinking and time and labor goes into preparing for those conversations, to have a thought partner or therapist who understands the complexity or the nuances of an Asian parent-child dynamic. Wow, what a relief. What a relief. And I think that even as you're sharing these success stories, the fact that we can have better relationships with a family member as a result of, you know, having conversations with an Anise Health care provider feels very in alignment too with the fact that as an AAPI community, we are community oriented. We are family first in many respects. And so to be able to honor that and honoring yourself at the same time, like, wow, like that's incredible. That's really, really incredible. So
yeah, and I say that because one of the reasons that people don't want to come to mental health services in the Asian group is this idea that this will take me away from my family. Even young people have this feeling that, you know, like if I talk about the way my parents are, my therapist is going to say, oh, you should have better boundaries, aka don't pick up their phone, right? And sometimes you do have to do that, I understand, in the extreme circumstances. But that's the thing, right? There's this fear that the Western therapy is telling us to stay away from our parents. And the reason I highlight these success stories is because that is wrong. Therapy is not meant to break you away from your family. It is meant to find ways to become closer in ways that is healthy and safe for both people. And that's why that's some of the most common success stories, is because that's what we're all working on.
Because that's what we are all working on.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. As we sort of close out this discussion, Israa, I'm wondering if you would be willing to share, if listeners today took one courageous step after this episode to prioritize culturally aligned well-being in their own lives, what would you want this step to be?
I would want everyone to do one check-in with a community member of theirs that they've been wanting to check in with, but they've felt awkward about asking them how they are. Yeah, because but that mirrors back to us, right? That allows us to then also talk to people about what we are struggling with.
Absolutely.
And, in our community, oftentimes we don't reach out to check in with other people because we're like, oh, it's going to make them feel embarrassed. They might feel awkward. Shame, right? Shame. We're just going to put this face on and everyone's going to pretend like it's okay. And that's why I want people to just reach out, connect with one person, ask them how they are genuinely, and give them the opportunity to tell you. And that allows you space to then share about yourself, right?
Yes.
And that ultimately makes seeking help easier. I could sit here and say, go to the website. That's the one change I want you to do. Go fill out the form that's only 5 minutes long and seek therapy. And yes, that's important. But I think what's even more important is for us to kind of start this conversation in our community, because people will come to the website when they need care, and that's going to happen. And I hope that they do. But I think we need to make this change in our communities a lot.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for giving all of us permission to do that. So I really appreciate that. My final question for you, would you be willing to define what does courage mean to you?
Oh, okay. Courage to me means being able to see both the good and the bad within yourself and hold them with equal compassion.
Oh, that's beautiful. I appreciate that. And that's a wonderful way to end this conversation. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Courage Class. I hope today's conversation gave you a little encouragement and inspiration. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And for extra motivation, tools, and behind-the-scenes content, sign up for my newsletter. I'd love to share with you more there. See you next time.